Secondly, I am convinced that the leaders that I've talked to in the last days, I met with Foreign Minister Bernard Kouchner of France while I was there. Prime Minister Gordon Brown called me while I was there, and we talked about, he had talked to President Karzai and wanted me to have a sense of that conversation. And he made it very, very clear to me that he is prepared, and he spoke on behalf of the other allied leaders that he had talked to. They are all prepared to do what is necessary to make this election as successful as we conceivably can.
So more resources. It sounds like what you're saying is NATO would contribute more resources. We could. I mean, is that?
I think that the Secretary General of NATO ought to speak to what they're going to commit to it. I will tell you that the people I talked to on the ground, Ambassador Eikenberry, Secretary of State Clinton, and Prime Minister Brown and others, all said that they are committed to down, and others all said that they are committed to do what is necessary. This is our commitment. They are engaged in trying to develop their democracy. They have invested heavily and deeply in that at the risk of life. This is part of their constitution they've adopted. This is part of why we are there, to help them develop governance. So we have a responsibility to try to help make that work.
Who makes that determination? What's needed? I mean, you said that everybody's
the determination of what is needed will be made by the people on the ground, by the UN representative on the ground, Kaya Ide, by obviously our ambassador in consultations with the government of Afghanistan, and they'll make their recommendations.
Is it a counterinsurgency?
You said, as a matter of common sense, the president would want to wait and see how the November 7th runoff plays out?
No, I said I think that as a matter of common sense, the president would feel that it makes sense to wait till the end of this 2-week period. 2 weeks is a very short span of time, folks, to determine whether or not you have a government to work with in a war. And it's very hard for me to believe that the president would decide otherwise.
Is it a counterinsurgency versus a counterterrorism dynamic here?
Say again?
As you talk about recalibration, is it a matter of weighing counterinsurgency versus counterterrorism, or is there some other way to think about this?
The president has already taken off the table at the meeting that we had here at the White House, I think, a week ago now or so. The president took off the table the concept of a limited, strictly counterterrorism strategy. I think most of us have decided that you can't do counterterrorism effectively unless you have a sufficient footprint to be able to have intelligence on which to operate. And it's very difficult to have adequate counterterrorism if people don't have confidence in you or in your presence or in your durability. It's hard to take the risks if you may die for that choice. So I think that some kind of footprint, some kind of presence, obviously, is predicated. What the president is trying to decide, what I'm trying to land on, and a lot of others, is exactly what is the configuration of that, and exactly what can we achieve within what kind of limits that are appropriate to the national security interests of our country, which is really why we're there and what we have to meet. But I think we can get there.
It sounds like you're favoring counterterrorism versus counterinsurgency. I mean, just because
no, I'm not. I just said point blank. I agree with the president's decision. The question here, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly at what rate and in what shape can your counterinsurgency effort take place and achieve the goals you want to achieve? How vast a footprint do you try to create to be able to protect the national security interests of our country? And what is the pace at which you are asking troops to secure certain areas? And what are you doing after they've secured them in order to guarantee that both they and the population are protected and that you're achieving the goals you want to as you go forward? I will have more to say about that on Friday, and I'm confident the president will have a lot more to say about that in the days ahead. Yeah.
You said that
we'll wrap this up in a moment, folks, because I got to get back to the Hill for
2 weeks is not a long time, and it would make sense to see if you have a government to work with at the end of that time.
No, I said what kind of government? You're going to have a government.
Okay.
I said you want to see what the structure of that government is. Who are the ministers? Who's your Minister of Defense? Do you have confidence in the Minister of Defense? Who's your Minister of the Interior, Finance? All of those kinds of issues. What are the commitments that that president will make to overall reform and capacity to reach local governments and to do the things you need to do to back up our troops as they are engaged? These are all critical questions. General McChrystal, I spent 3 hours with General McChrystal in Kabul and General Rodriguez, and I met with General Petraeus. They will all tell you that counterinsurgency without governance and without development will not work. So while we all know our troops can accomplish their part of this, it is critical to have the full measure of whatever we try to do be successful.
Do you have any indication that Mr. Abdullah would not be as committed in these areas? If he
I did not discuss those parts of Mr. Abdullah's platform or policies. I have no knowledge of what his attitude is about that particular component of it. We talked about restoring confidence to the government. We talked about the government reforms that he thinks are necessary in order to deliver good governance in Afghanistan. But we didn't get into the counterinsurgency and military components of it.
Can you just give us some color on what went into the negotiations with Mr. Karzai? Did you, in fact, invoke your political experience in running for president in 2004?
I have to tell you, I'm grateful to President Karzai for really a remarkable series of meetings and great hospitality. I think we ate lunch or dinner 3 times together with large groups, and then we broke in smaller groups. I spent many hours with him one-on-one, and then we had other sessions where we had larger groups of people present. There were times when he was prepared to say this isn't going anywhere. And we had to work to find ways to convince him that we could actually be productive and get additional work done. And he, to his credit, didn't just lock the door and shut his mind and say, I've had enough, but he engaged in that. He bought into the creative efforts to try to find ways of looking at things. And he was very patient with me and with that process. Like any leader, he had internal pressures and internal issues of one faction or another that believed one thing or another. Not to mention the fact that he believed very deeply personally that he had won the first round. And so there was a powerful need to overcome both those domestic pressures as well as some of his own personal beliefs. Again, we had I've been, as I said, I've done this for a while, but I had one of the more interesting personal journeys, if you will, talking with him about Afghan history, about his family, their tribe, his father, their long history in Afghanistan and its politics, the period of Soviet domination, the Taliban. He took me on a personal tour of the old palace where the king lived. He showed me what the Taliban did to the tapestries. We walked around his personal residence at great length, just talking about the challenges of the country. And it was really, as personal and as intriguing and productive as I think this kind of endeavor can be. And I'm grateful to him for the trust that he put in me on a personal level to be able to try to have that kind of conversation and relationship. In the end, I think we're better for that, and I think our opportunities can be followed up on in a more effective way in the days ahead.
Senator, just to clarify, the runoff is November 7th. It could take up to a week or more for the results to become clear. So we're talking about mid-November.
Are you counseling
the president to wait until mid-November?
I have no question that in a two-person race, given the experience of the last go-around, that every effort possible is going to be made to try to find the results as rapidly as possible with as many checks and guarantees about transparency and accountability as possible. So I look forward to a fairly rapid determination, and I think we'll have a much better sense much sooner than we did last time.
The president should wait until the result is clear.
I don't see how I mean, I don't see how you turn to a mom or a dad in Massachusetts or in California or in Wichita, or anywhere, and ask, their kids to go out into an augmented effort in a country where a critical component of the mission you're asking them to perform requires good government, and you don't know what the government is. So I would strongly urge the president to put this together in the next weeks. From the schedule that I learned from General McChrystal, the first troops can't and won't arrive there for several months anyway. So you can make what's called a preliminary deployment order. He could make a preliminary deployment order for a battalion this week, next week.